everybody, today on the channel I am for the third time driving an Aston Martin DB11. But critically, this is the first time I've been able to experience the car as it was launched back in 2016, complete with glorious 5.2 litre twin-turbo V12. The DB11 was an incredibly significant car for Aston. Not only is the introduction of any new DB a big deal, but this was also the car that was supposed to set the template for what Aston Martin called their second century. Unfortunately, the car so spectacularly failed to meet its targets that it was withdrawn from sale in original guise just 2 years later. In today's video, I'm asking two simple questions. First off, what exactly was it that went wrong? And secondly, does it actually matter anymore? The answers? Well, stay tuned to find out. Ahead of today's review, I actually decided to break one of my golden rules, and that is that before conducting my review, I will not read or view anybody else's. The simple reason being that I don't want my opinion to be coloured by that of anybody else's. Every now and again I'll get somebody in the comment section who says that of course my opinion must be invalid because it's different to all the others, and that does make me wonder what the point of having multiple opinions then is. And the curious thing about the DB11 is that much like the Ferrari California, though today we all know it was a terrible, terrible failure, if you view or read the reviews of it when it was new, you'd really struggle to get that impression, because I have watched reviews from Harry Metcalf, Top Gear, both Chris Harris and Joey from Friends, CarVertical, CarVertical, and they all liked the DB11. No, they loved it. In fact, Joey said that it was possibly the most usable, best all-round Aston Martin for decades. And in many ways you can see exactly where he's coming from, though we all knew the DB11 was going to be a step change from the cars of old, which since about 2003 had all been based on Aston Martin's V8 architecture. There was still a lot of focus on making sure it was both typically Aston, yet at the same time a nice, useful step forward. So it's still got a largely aluminium construction, but now with a different method, meaning that the car is a little bit stiffer, but critically a little bit roomier inside. Compared to a DB9 or a Vanquish, there's certainly a bit more space in here and a hair more in the boot, though not exactly much more for your rear passengers. Aston Martin did make a fairly big deal of the fact it was roomier for those in the back, but no, sorry guys, I'm not going to give you that one. In other big news, Aston Martin clearly understood just how important a V12 was to their customers, particularly for the flagship car. And so, though we all knew by that point in time they'd done a deal with AMG and Astons were soon to be receiving their engines, this car was launched with the 5.2 litre twin-turbo V12 based on the old 5.9 litre naturally aspirated unit. Not only does it look pretty decent and very impressive in that engine bay, it also sounds good too. In fact, pop it into Sport Plus mode, the valves on the exhaust at the back will be wedged open, and you'll be gifted with a glorious and distinctively Aston tune. In terms of the chassis, this car also had a refreshing approach to how suspension should be done. In other words, they haven't just decided to make it stiffer and harder than the car it replaced in order to make it marginally faster around an ultimately meaningless racetrack. In this case, much credit has to go to Aston Martin's acquisition of Matt Becker, who'd just been made redundant by his boss at Lotus, clearly not quite understanding exactly how important ride and dynamics are to a company like Lotus. Their loss was Aston Martin's gain, and what you have here is a car that in GT mode certainly you would call genuinely comfortable. And even if you dial the suspension all the way up into its Sport Plus setting, where it does take on an air of jitter, even then it's only maybe as harsh as some of its rivals in their softest setting. In terms of ride, handling and composure, I would say this car beats a Bentley Continental GT hands down. If anything, you could make an argument that this car in its regular soft suspension setting is perhaps a little bit too soft, a little bit too floaty, but the fact is, it's got a really really nice ride about it. The car is also filled with all sorts of details, both big and small, to remind you that Aston knew this was a premium car. So your cabin is filled with acres of leather and a selection of glorious materials depending on how you specified the car. This one is in the, I think, rather striking and interesting colour combination of ultramarine on the exterior, which is a very deep blue, and dark night in here, which is actually a slightly less deep blue and reminds me of many a Ferrari interior. I actually quite like it. Generally speaking, I'm not a fan of blue interiors, nor would it have been this car's owner Brian's first choice, but he's grown to like it. And I've got to say, though I still dislike certain elements of the car, like the silly weird door handles that I think are supposed to encourage a Dutch reach, but actually just wouldn't work for that. It's a nice place to be. We'll get on to some of the other stuff I know you're thinking about in a minute. Famously, the car even has an electric motor down here for your little cover over the centre cubby hole, which is definitely not necessary. It even has soft close on both the boot and the bonnet, though not the doors. Bit weird that. The gearbox here was an 8-speed ZF automatic, which I know upset a few people by virtue of not being a dual clutch, and though it doesn't shift quite as quickly as, say, even a later 8-speed ZF, it's still perfectly good enough, responds to your inputs, and I do quite like these nice big aluminium paddles. The throw in the early V12s is a little longer than in the later cars, and I've got to say, though it doesn't bother me, you do notice it. By choosing a torque converter automatic, it means that around town it's actually a far better behaved car than your equivalent Ferrari, which of the day would have been an F12, a car I am quite familiar with. Yes, the F12 was always a lot more money, closer really to the later DBS, but when it comes to this segment of cars, there aren't really all that many to choose from. The steering wheel, which here is a slightly squared off affair, a little bit like that in the old Vanquish and 177, now has the controls for the suspension and the drivetrain mounted to it, so you can access them nice and easily, and I think Aston's decision to give you simply one for suspension and one for powertrain with 3 settings for each is marvellous. Who needs 7 different settings for 5 different functions? This does exactly what you need it to. My only gripe with them is that they do seem just a little bit slow to respond on occasion. In terms of options, this car doesn't have all that many to talk about. The one big one for me is the B&O sound system with the pop-up tweeters, which I think is one of the best you can find in any car today. It was a very expensive option, I think about £4,500, but for my ears, worth it. Okay then, so far, so good. What exactly is it that went so badly wrong with the car then? If you listen to the reviews of it in period, it doesn't seem like the car actually does all that much wrong. Even the turning circle isn't that bad. Well, this is an Aston, you see, and I think to try and improve a car by measuring it is where you make your biggest mistake. For me, I think the DB11's problems may have actually started and ended with the way that it looks. I have yet to meet anybody that thinks it is prettier than the outgoing DB9 or the Vanquish. And for me, it's also a long way from even the DBS that came both before and after. With other manufacturers, I don't think this is maybe quite so big a deal. Even Ferrari have had their fair share of cars that aren't really lookers. But for Aston Martin, that's a big thing. And though I don't think today I'd call the DB11 ugly, as I once would have, it's just not good enough. And I've yet to encounter anybody that would buy one on looks alone. Harry Metcalf in his review was adamant that it was a pretty car, but for me, just doesn't work. The front end is pretty decent and I like the nice wide hips at the back, but it's this rear treatment they've given it with the floating C-pillar and this fancy aero blade that they've given it, where you've got the air coming in here and then popping out the back like a sort of, virtual spoiler almost. Very, very clever, yes, but it just doesn't look great. The DBS, by virtue of just having a slightly more aggressive finish with a little flick on it that's permanently there, I think looks a little bit more resolved. The new DB12 then seems to have adopted much of the look of the front of the DBS, but at the back it's actually still relatively close to this, and it's there I think the car works the least. The other big problem, and it has been discussed in just about every review of the car, the adoption of the Mercedes infotainment system. And I feel this was a big mistake. Much criticism was levelled at Aston's older systems, and the simple fact is that people that drive cars tend to fall into one of two categories: those who are technically literate and those who aren't. Those who are, I think, are the sort of people that'll just have an iPhone or a Google Pixel or whatever, and they want to plug it in and get Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. In its first iteration, the DB11 did not have either of those. And most frustratingly, the old DB9, Vanquish and Vantage did. For those who are not technically literate, just about any infotainment system is always going to be a faff, and this one is particularly faffy. In fact, even those who know it and understand it generally aren't that complimentary about it. Yes, I know, Ferraris are also perhaps even weirder in so many ways, but this just wasn't right. The biggest gripe I think that many actually had was the fact that in the old cars they also had often a very horrible and out-of-date infotainment, but you could make it go away. Here you couldn't. If they just made it that this screen at the top could have been folded away, I think that would have addressed many major criticisms of the interior. I also think that Aston Martin made a little bit of a mistake by neglecting to tend to the number fiends, by which I mean that this car was actually a bit heavier than the older platforms, being about 1.9 tons with the V12 you've got here, and in terms of power, it just didn't really move the game on that much. I know the old DB9 had 517 PS and this 608, which sounds like a big difference. But the old Vanquish, with the naturally aspirated V12, had 603 PS. And then suddenly, 5 extra horses for a pair of twin turbos doesn't sound like all that much. Sure, we all know that a big difference will be in terms of torque, and here it's again not up by as much as you might think, from sort of mid-400s to 516 pound-foot. That's 700 Newton-meters. In other words, the limit of this particular gearbox, and actually it was the box that had to be changed in the DBS in order to enable the engine simply to make the power and torque of which it was always capable. Here, of course, it does at least make the torque that it's got a lot earlier. So in the old cars, peak was at 5,500, and here 1,500, going all the way up to 5,500. The fact those turbos are also contributing relatively little means that the response from the engine is fantastic. Even in GT mode, as we are here at 2,000 RPM, you put your foot down and you just get moved back into the seat. You can feel the power being fed in very gently, progressively. It's a lovely thing. Although, one issue these cars did have was in deploying that torque, because there is now so much of it so low down. With the original Bridgestones, they can struggle a bit, and so it's for that reason they are one of the 2 modifications that Brian has made to this car. The fitment of a set of Michelin Pilot Sport 4S, which has transformed the traction of it, and the retrofitment of Android Auto and Apple CarPlay support, making this a much more usable affair. And that's just as well, because, unlike many an exotic car owner, Brian drives this a lot. He's had it now for something like 20 months, and in that time he's put on 25,000 miles. Yeah, absolute legend. It replaced a rear-wheel drive V8 Jaguar F-Type, and the dream was the DBS Superleggera. However, he found himself in a position where, though one of those was still some way away, he could actually go from the Jag to this for only a very small amount extra, and so decided, why not? This, after all, is clearly most of what the DBS offers him, and he figured this would be the best way to sample what exactly Aston life is like and how he gets on with it. I think it's safe to say that he's really enjoying it, as am I from this seat too, although there are a few things that I'm not so fond of. First off, the aforementioned infotainment and looks, but you know that, you've seen me rant about those a lot. The dash itself, likewise, is nice enough and now all digital, but I just always felt never quite special enough, particularly when compared with the beautiful dual that was the system you got in the old VH cars. However, what's unique to the V12? Well, you can feel that the front end is fairly blunt. The other DB11s I've driven have both been the V8, and I know journalists love to wax lyrical about how you can always sense the difference in the weight of an engine between various models. Sometimes I think maybe that's just journalists trying to impress us with how much more they know than we do. But in this case, it's definitely true. You can feel that there is a lot more over that front axle, and though I couldn't say from here exactly what the weight distribution is, I know it's actually about 50-50, but marginally that way. The big deal is, though, that it does feel like a car that's maybe not quite as happy to go around a bend as the V8. It's certainly got pace, that you cannot question, and the steering's pretty good too, though it is that steering which does communicate to you just how hard that front end is having to work. Though in its defence, if you do push through that slight initial hesitation, you find a chassis that actually is quite keen to dig in and get round a bend. It's just when you're going straight, it feels like it's really quite happy doing that and doesn't want to deviate from its course. The truth actually is that it really is as much sports car as I think anyone would ever need it to be. What you do absolutely need, though, is to put the car into sport mode. Sport Plus are necessary, but for a better drive, sport is essential. Giving the V12 a little bit of kudos back, though, you would imagine it would be the far thirstier of the two, but in fact, it's actually impressively economical, and on a recent run up to Scotland, Brian got over 30 to the gallon out of this, which is fabulous. That means the fuel tank at 78 litres, which would be a little bit smaller than I'd like in a car like this, isn't actually as bad as you might imagine. It gives you real decent range. The car grips really nicely, has no issue putting its power down, though I would say it just doesn't feel quite as hyper as I think even the F-Type does. Maybe that's just the turbos taking a moment to give you the best of what they can, but it doesn't feel like a car that's quite as keen to go as the Jag. In a lot of ways, that's not a bad thing, because the Jaguar sometimes can be a little bit too much. And I think maybe it is really as simple as saying that for this car, it didn't really do anything massively wrong. I don't think it's the prettiest car, and the infotainment certainly was a bad idea. It was out of date even then. I think they actually should have stuck with what they already had and revised it and made it a little bit better. This is a bit of a mess. The issue, though, is that if you already owned an Aston Martin, you had a DB9.2 or a Vanquish, and you came to me and said, I'm thinking of changing it for a DB11, should I? I'd have to say no, because though I can think of many ways this car does things very right, I just can't think of any where the old cars didn't do it right. And likely as a daily proposition, this is maybe a little more livable, a little more usable, particularly if you've got the updated infotainment here. But many Aston Martin owners don't drive their cars on a daily basis, which is a shame, because they should, because they are amazing. When you then remind yourself of the fact that new Aston Martins do tend to have rather violent depreciation, certainly at the point when this car was being made, anybody that did have a Vanquish was likely going to be asked to pay a significant premium to move from it into this. And that I definitely wouldn't do. I mean, I wouldn't swap a Vanquish for this. However, now the world has moved on. And today, you can actually get one of these for less than the price of many a Vanquish 2, or even a DBS, not the Superleggera, the old Casino Royale one. Today, the cheapest DB11, which is a V12, on Auto Trader is yours for a hair under £70,000. And it's a lot of car for the money. In fact, some of them, like this, have only just finished their free servicing, so you can be almost certain of the fact that they've been seen by Aston Martin main dealers for most of their life. Whether that's a good or bad thing is up to you. Many will still be in factory warranty, and if you get them from an approved used dealer, you'll get the extended version of that, timeless, I believe, Aston Martin branded, meaning that your overall ownership costs shouldn't be all that much. I think there is a good chance they may still keep depreciating as much as 70 grand already seems like a bit of a bargain. However, it should just be depreciation, servicing and fuel that you're going to wind up paying for. The servicing isn't the cheapest. The last one this had was £870 plus a few other bits, so wound up being, I think, just under £3,000, but that included the set of Michelin Pilot Sport 4S and a few other bits. So compared with many a Ferrari of the time, it's, I think, actually a little bit cheaper. It is certainly a big car, and on some of these narrower sections of road you do have to take a little bit of extra caution, but you can see a fair amount of that bonnet, you know where it is, and it's not a bad car to place. I have just noticed though it does have both heated and ventilated seats. Oh, and the ventilation works quite nicely, so there's still plenty of luxury throughout. And the stereo, have I mentioned the stereo? Because that's really, really good. Like the previous DB11s I've driven, it's a fine thing. And if you really must have a V12 in your life, it's an excellent way to get it. But if you're a keener driver, I would say that the V8 is the car to have. And of course, if you want a drop top, that's the only one you can get unless you want a DBS. Next up for me to try is going to be the DB11 AMR, the car that replaced this. Because you see, although I actually thought the DB11 had done fairly well, apparently Aston said it really didn't meet expectations. I was confused because when the DB11 came out, I did start seeing them just about everywhere. I could never say that of the new Vantage. Even now, they're still a relatively rare sight, but the DB11 I thought actually sold. Not well enough, it would seem. The AMR introduced many learnings they had from this car and also the V8, so it's a tauter, sharper thing with a little bit more power, 640 horses. I think they really needed to try and make the V12 stand out a little bit more, and I do think that perhaps the DBS just shouldn't have happened. They should have just made this a little bit closer to that from the off, and I think that would have been the winning formula. Because I also remember the DBS being a bit too much, but it's been a long time since I've driven one of those, so if you are watching this video and you've got a Superleggera you'd like to see featured on the channel, please do drop me a line. In any case, all that remains to be said for now is a big thank you to Brian for bringing his car out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.